Welcome to another episode of Rockets Talk. The Rockets, Roosh, the Rockets, bro. We are 10-1 in our last 11 games. We've won, I think, 8 in a row, 9 in a row now. This team has been balling lately, and are we ever going to lose? I guess that's the question of this pod. Are the Rockets going to go undefeated for the next 5 years?
It does not feel like they're ever going to lose at the moment. I mean, this is the best basketball we've seen this decade from the Rockets. I consider the decade, by the way, to start with the one, right? So 2020 is the end of the last decade. This is the best basketball we've seen of the decade, period, right? And there's a lot to kind of talk about, a lot to kind of look at. They started playing this way when they beat Phoenix and then beat Sacramento and almost beat the Clippers. And they've just carried it through. And it's like the natural progression, right? They were getting it, they were figuring it out, and now they've just turbo boosted, and it feels like there's no going back. So
I mean, it's hella impressive. The change from where they were prior to the All-Star break to the post All-Star break. I know one of the things that I saw early on, they started playing faster. Their pace really increased post All-Star break, but the efficiency was trash for like the first 3 or 4 games. The 3-point shooting actually took a dip. And then just like that, it just hit. And this is something that, obviously Ime gets a lot of credit, and we'll talk about him more later on. But I'm going to go over just some things some stats that I think are interesting for this Rockets team right now. So during this streak, the team has been playing literally like one of the best teams in the NBA throughout these 11 games. We have the number 2 offensive rating since that Phoenix game, bro, in the NBA, right behind, ironically enough, the Boston Celtics, Coach Udoka's old team. And in that stretch as well, the Rockets are the number 6 defense in the NBA for a net rating of number 2. Bro, we have the number 2 net rating in the league in that since that streak started. We are also one of the teams that is really shooting the ball well. If you guys know, for the most part of this year, this calendar year, the Rockets have been one of the worst teams at 3-point shooting. To me, one of the unspoken things about why they're doing so well is how everybody across the board has just really picked up the shooting. And you add that to another fact that I tweeted about this yesterday, the transition play. There's a lot of discourse on the timeline about transition, about pace. I think people get them mixed up. The Rockets' pace post All-Star break has been top 5
Hey, question. I know the answer. Do you know what their pace is on the season? Whole season?
Right, in everything combined together?
Just pace for the regular season for the
Rockets. I haven't looked at it separated from pre and post All-Star. What is it?
If you had to guess for just talking whole season, if you had to guess where they rank in the league, where would you guess?
Whole season. because they were so slow, I'm gonna say they're probably down like 25.
14.
Damn. Y'all know how crazy that is?
14. So there's a lot, like, I don't know, and I'm going to double check that as we talk right now, but I checked it, about an hour ago. There's a lot to, like, for me, I'm trying to figure out what it didn't look like it. And for most of the season, I don't think the numbers even reflected that.
No, they were bottom. They were like 30th for last I was checking was in January. I would say, honestly, they were like 30th.
14. They are, it's 99.66 possessions per 100, I guess.
I think they've done a lot of heavy lifting over these past few games. One thing I have noticed with the pace, and this is with more one of the things to me why we were able to keep our defense so good early on in the season is the fact that we played at a lower pace, because the other team then has to, usually when you slow a game down, the other team is going to be slowed down naturally. And I think keeping the possessions low, our points per game, opponents' points per game was really low. I'm seeing that number creep back up, but we're doing it because we're playing faster. So teams are going to score more. And it's kind of weird to see. And I don't know if I can draw any inferences from this about how pace dictates defense and defensive rating and some of those numbers. How maybe, not saying the Rockets are a bad defense or we're gimmicky with it, but I think some of the numbers about our defensive efficiency and rating, obviously we're a good isolation guarding team, is part of the reason to me is that we played at a slower pace and we're able to keep teams.
Well, it's like in football, right? If you're like a methodical ground game team, you rest your defense. They have to defend the field less, right? So in theory, you'll be a better defense unless your defense is just terrible. It's kind of the same thing. I think Ime was protecting them, right, from themselves until they were ready. Because once you let the cat out of the bag, it's hard to put it back in. And so I think that he has kind of stuck to a methodical approach of like, yo, we're going to build it brick by brick. We're going to start with the basics. That's why the offense was so kind of just simple and basic and safe. Pick and roll, find the open man, nothing crazy, nothing overly creative that is conducive to turning the ball over. And then, as you know, once they got to a certain point, start building off of that. And we started seeing it. You know, they beat Phoenix, they beat Sacramento, both on the road. I think people forget that's for this team, that's a big deal. Then they almost beat the Clippers on the second night of a back-to-back. They choked that one away. And then again, they've taken off, and it's all just kind of like it all just seems to add up, man. I mean, 14th in pace. And if you look at the net rating, man, they have the same net rating as the Warriors. They at 1.4 plus 1.4. They are right behind Dallas and someone else, Sacramento, who are both plus 1.5. They have a better net rating than Miami and the Lakers, right? So as a team, it's like it's all coming together. And what's crazy about this stretch, they have fallen one spot in defensive rating since Sengun went out. They were 7th when he went out. They're 8th right now. But I think the numbers have roughly stayed pretty much the
Relative,
same.
yeah.
They have jumped. I'm going to double check this right now. They have jumped 4 spots in offensive rating. So it's funny, man. We have this discourse about, let me see. Yeah, they're 20th. They were 24th in offensive rating. They're 20th right now. And so we have this discourse about like, oh, you can defend better with Sengun. They're playing better offense without Sengun. And it's weird. It's like this Ewing theory type thing. And we could talk about if it's sustainable. You know, we could talk about whether teams will game plan for this offense and eventually figure it out. We could talk about if this offense is going to work in an actual playoff series. We could talk about matchups, right? Like against teams like Denver and Sacramento. I think you need Sengun. But it's interesting. It's a lot to kind of like figure out. I mean, and we'll keep it real. I'm not dismissing what they've done, but they haven't played good teams. You know, Utah without Markkanen is not a good team. Washington twice, not a good team. Spurs, not a good team. They beat Cleveland, missing a few players, but still beat Cleveland. Chicago's an okay team. So we'll see. I don't know.
I mean, definitely this stretch of games after this Portland game on Monday is going to be huge. And I think that's really, I seen Sam Vecini make a tweet saying that that'll be the telltale sign for the team and for like Jalen's play and how, and we'll talk about Jalen as well. One thing, I'm going to ask you this, then I'm going to go over some numbers. Is there a play style difference? Because obviously the numbers are similar. I think the output results on most of what the Rockets are doing with Sengun out of the starting lineup with his injury now. Is there a play style difference or on something that you could tangibly see from the team that you would say is just different than how they play with their current starters versus when Alp was playing?
So when Alp was playing, it seems like they all deferred to Alp, right? A lot of us wanted them to move off the ball. I think they still struggled to like figure out that timing and to figure out, you know, how to play around Alp, because again, playing around a big like that isn't something that just intuitively happens. You got to figure it out, right? Certain players get it quicker than others. Ime Thompson immediately understood, but he has a high basketball IQ. I mean, like he said he hadn't set a screen until Ime asked him to this season, which is crazy to me because he's a really good, intuitive, instinctive roll man, off-ball player. Tari Eason, great cutter, obviously has been hurt. But then you had guys that operate with the ball in their hand, right? Like Jalen. Jabari was kind of a spot-up guy with Sengun. Now they're just playing like fast, helter-skelter, moving the ball, driving, kicking. Look, the transition and the getting out in transition, I had kind of looked at that as like, yeah, that's kind of a cop-out, right? Like, okay, sure, we get in transition, but basketball's played in the half court. Now watching them, I'm thinking, okay, no, getting in transition has really helped this team. I still don't know what it's going to do in the playoffs. If you can rely on something like that in the playoffs, but they are a faster, more athletic team. I mean, we're seeing the lobs that they're throwing. We're just seeing like when they get the ball, they move quickly. Jalen is catching lobs in transition. Amen's throwing them. Amen's finishing them. Fred is starting to throw them finally. And then the shooting. It's the shooting. I don't know what has happened. Fred VanVleet tied the single game franchise record with James Harden and Chandler Parsons, 10
Yeah,
threes.
that was crazy.
You know, by the way, he's having the most efficient season of his career by far right now. He's over 57% TS. He's never been over 50. He's never been over, I think, 55.3 TS. And he's up in the 57s right now, which is crazy. He also has the lowest usage of his career as a starting point guard. With the Raptors, he was around 22, 23% usage. He's at 19% right now. I just think, to answer your question, I think that they are playing the type of ball. It's kind of like the Mavericks back in the day with Rick Carlisle when they had Jason Terry and Josh Howard and Dirk, and their whole MO was to ISO and attack, right? And back then it was like this kind of semi-revolutionary thing. It was like, people don't do this, right? People don't just ISO perimeter players and just attack. Now it's kind of commonplace, but they are ISOing with their athleticism and they are attacking, and it's working. And then when help comes, they kick it, and they are on fire from three. So I call it's like small ball with an injection of athleticism.
Yeah, I mean that's a great point. I would say one of the biggest differences, obviously not, I think they still run some of the actions with Londale that they do with Sengun, but you're not going to have the gravity. So teams are able to play them more straight up, but like you said, they're spreading the teams out, allowing their guys to be able to attack in isolation, and guys are hitting their shots. But to me, the biggest difference in their points increase, because I think last I checked, their points per possession was like 134, which would be like the greatest offense ever.
Can I make one more point before you get into the numbers?
Go ahead.
I think, and this is a lot about Jalen too, but I think it's the whole team. I think they have found rhythm, right? They have found a rhythm that you cannot quantify. You can't explain how to capture it. But if you've ever played a sport, if you've ever watched a sport, you know when a team is in rhythm, right? Like when Mahomes and the Chiefs offense is just like hitting, and you already know when he drops back, they're getting yards. There's nothing you can do to stop it. The Warriors, the way they used to be, right? When it was like, oh man, Steph has 3 people in his face from 40 feet out. That thing's still going in. It doesn't matter. They've hit that level. And I think that has to do partially. I'm not saying they're a better team without Sengun necessarily, but I'm saying that without deferring to Sengun, they have stopped standing around. Because like when you play with a good player, it's easy to just like give them the ball and watch and rely on that player and then kind of defer to that player. There's no more deferring. There's no more standing around. They have all collectively basically filled whatever void he left, and they found a rhythm doing it. Which is why like Jalen is like throwing up step back threes over 2 dudes and turning around and running down the court before the ball hits the net and it's going in. Like it's a rhythm. And when you get in that rhythm with talented players, it's really hard to stop. And so that's what it is. I mean, Sengun's out. They're not standing around and just watching the guy who leads the team in scoring, and they're all moving as a result of it. So rhythm.
It reminds me, I remember in there was that game where Chris Paul led the Rockets to beat the Warriors when James Harden got hurt. And guys were cutting. I don't know if you remember that game. It was
24 points, 17 assists from Chris Paul on the road.
That was one of my favorite performances. That one and him and the Jazz. Chris Paul's one of my favorite Rockets ever. I don't care how long, like ever. I'm just throwing that out there. But you remember that game? I don't know. To me, I remember the discourse was like, why don't we play like this all the time?
You want to know something?
What's up?
That was a very fracturing moment for that team too. Because Chris Paul was like, ugh. And James Harden was like, nope.
So it is interesting, the team dynamics, and when you have, but obviously you know, Chris Paul wasn't going to lead us to a conference finals playing that way. But you know, to me, one of the key things that I've seen from the team, I think, is really the transition. I think the transition play, and this is for everybody across the board. Fred being more intentional about it. I think even Dylan, all the guys that were usually slower pace. Let's methodical. Let's get a good half court set and get a good shot. Are running, and it's more of those guys than it is anything. But I think the number one guy that's impacting is Ime Thompson. I'm on cleaning the glass. What I did, I filtered some lineups just to see some things. Right now, with the current lineup, the starters that we have with Ime in place of Sengun, with everybody else. The Rockets are scoring in transition 138.1 points per possession, which is way number 1 in the NBA, right? This is 147 possessions.
That's crazy.
That's crazy. Points per possession, 9.6 That means in transition, they're scoring 9.6 points per 100 possession, which is way number one in the NBA. The frequency is middle, slightly below average. So the frequency is came down a little bit with this group, but when they get into transition, they're going to score. Like no matter what, they're going to score. Relative to our team, the frequency is up. Points per play, 171 points, 0.4 points per possession in transition. The number one action that kicks them into transition is off steals. So I call this the Ime Thompson effect. You're going to ask, how do you know it's a men? Okay, you know what I did? I filtered out. I took him off the starters and just left everybody else on there. The four-man group of Jabari, Fred, Jalen, and Dylan without Amen, without Alperen Sengun, just to see if anybody else has that impact on there. You know where we rank with just those four guys without Sengun and Amen? We're the worst team in the league in transition.
Wow.
Points, 99.1 points per possession. That's dead last.
Wow.
Dead last. Frequency, almost dead last. Points per possession, we're negative. We're actually losing the transition battle against the opponent without Amen or Sengun. So I'm trying to just isolate to see who's the biggest catalyst for this new burst in running. It's the Ime Thompson effect.
It's got to be. Yeah.
This dude is such an impact player. When he's off the court, we are pretty much below average in every transition metrics. When he's on the court, we are 84th percentile in all transition metrics. 70th in points per play, 96th percentile in off steals scoring, off steal frequency, 96. Like, so to me, that does beg the question, bro. Like, if he is impacting, and I think there is something to him being on the court, does that change the calculus of how you view, how do we like put together this team going forward once everybody's healthy?
You know, it's tough, man. So I love Sengun, right? I think he was the best player on this team when he was healthy, right? I think that's objectively the case. He had an all-star campaign. He's the only player on this team in this franchise this decade that has had an all-star case. And not just like the fans think he has an all-star case, but like seriously had one, right? Top 5 in voting, probably would have been in the all-star game as a reserve if someone got hurt, kind of like how Scotty Barnes made it in the East, right? But it's clear that Ime Thompson has to play. He has to play. So the question is, okay, whose spot does he take? And what we're seeing when he takes Sengun's spot, good things seem to happen. So I don't know what that means. I don't know how you build it. I've been trying to go through it in my head and think of like, all right, what is the offseason? What do you do in the offseason? Because previously we were talking about, man, we need to find a shooting guard. I think that discourse has ceased, maybe not permanently, but for the time being, it has ceased and shifted to, well, what do you do? How do you improve this team? Because I'm looking at this team and now I'm thinking, well, okay, we just improved the bench. Get like a backup point guard. You have your backup center, right? Or you have starting centers if Sengun's not available. Like I don't know. It's starting to look like a complete team because like you've been saying, and you deserve your credit. The team was a Jalen leap away, and Jalen has taken enough leaps for 2 or 3 players over the last like 10 games. You know what's really interesting? We were talking about this in Rockets Watch. Someone brought it up, so it was not my original idea. I forget who brought it up. Credit to them. But this reminds me a lot of when Yao Ming went down during the 22-game win streak, if you remember that. Mm-hmm. I think he went down around like game 8 or 9 or something, and it felt like, oh, damn, season's over. And then they rattled off another, 12 or 13 in a row, right? As this like small ball unit, Dikembe Mutombo stepped up and did his role, Carl Landry, Steve Novak, like you remember, right? So was that team, and then that team got to the playoffs and they lost to Utah because they just didn't have enough, right? The magic that they had bottled, the rhythm that they had hit, it just wasn't enough to carry over. But this kind of reminds me of that. It's not the same because there's a lot of cornerstones here, and that team was more so like McGrady and just like a bunch of dudes outplaying their worth over that time span. I think Bobby Jackson, if I remember correctly, Bobby Jackson was one of them. But that's what it reminds me of. So like, how do you view the building of this team now that we're seeing this? I don't know, but I do think that there is really something to the athleticism and the pace. The whole issue was shooting coming into the season, right? The way I broke it down, the simplistic way I broke it down was they're undersized and they can't shoot. And both of those things are problems. You can usually overcome one of those things if you have the other. They didn't have either. And so I was like, I don't know how they're going to do this. Lately, the shooting has been through the roof. Jalen Green has gone from being literally having one of the worst 3-point shooting seasons of all time to over the last, 10 games being like the Western Conference Player of the Month, possibly. By the way, interesting stat. I don't know who posted this. I saw it on Twitter, so I apologize. I think over the last 5 years, no non-all NBA player has won Western Conference Player of the Month.
Yeah, and
Jalen Green, that's crazy. And Jalen Green is like, unless he falls off a cliff over here in the last couple of games, I think he's going to win Western Conference Player of the Month, right? So that is when we talk about him specifically, it's impossible to talk about the team without talking about him, because he went from being statistically one of the worst starters in the NBA to now statistically being like one of the 5 best players in the entire NBA. It's crazy. I want to ask, by the way, have you ever seen anything like this? The only thing I can think of is Linsanity, but that's not even the same.
Nah, not from the contrast of it. I don't know. I think, and this will allow me to sneak in something I did want to talk about from that LeBron James podcast, real quick. But before we do that, as far as with the team build, to me, it's an easy problem to fix. Like, you have Ime Thompson, you have Jalen, you have Sengun. I always bank on talent. In this league, you need talent to win. You will not get to the levels that we need to get to with this team. Like, this is obviously a nice story. But if you want to compete against Denver, if you want to compete against Clippers, you want to compete against the Celtics, you're going to need as many blue chippers on your team as possible. So the build going forward is still the same. Let's find out a way to maximize all these players. And that's why Udoka makes the big bucks. Like, he has to figure it out. Yep. I've seen chemistry between Amen and Sengun. They play really well off of each other. We obviously know Jalen and Sengun play well off of each other. We know Amen and Jalen play well off of each other. So they all individually play well off each other in pairs. It's just they have to like cook that up and make it make sense for the trio. Now, as far as like next year, to me, the only spots that would be open, it would be Dylan Brooks or Jabari. As far as if a man had to be inserted into the starting line, because I'm not moving Fred. I love what Fred VanVleet is doing off the ball. I wonder if you noticed this real quick. If you notice that Jalen is getting a lot of reps on ball as not really the initiator, but Fred is really letting him finish out the plays and acting as what Coach Udoka calls a receiver, and letting Jalen be a play starter. And I think Fred's efficiency off ball, to me, has opened up a different lane. I knew he could do this, but when I think about his third-year option, it makes me want to, like, maybe we could restructure this for you, brother, and see if you could be here a little bit longer. Because to me, the long-term goal is always going to be Jalen and Sengun two-man game, because that's going to be your 2 best offensive players using their gravity in tandem, and then having guys at different parts of the court that could feed off of the gravity they're going to create. And Fred being able to play off ball, to me, makes that move to the bench or whatever people thought, like, a man was going to be the main point guard. I kind of want the ball in Jalen's hands now if he's going to play like this. And that's another dynamic. We're talking about Sengun and the man. I'm talking about Jalen and the man. Like, I like how they're using him as a screener. I like him right now as that. I think as he gets older, Fred gets older, he may be able to usurp him in that ball handler role. But to me, it's going to be the 2-man with Jalen and LP. A men's role, I think, as a disruptor on defense and as a cutter, like a souped up super version of KJ Martin. And then Fred is an off ball kind of guy. And then Jabari, I think I would keep Jabari there. I think Dylan, I know people love Dylan. To me,
Dylan's expendable to me.
That's
personally.
me too. That is me too.
Like, I put a tweet out last night about what would this team look like with Paul George playing small forward instead of Dylan Brooks.
That'd be great.
That'd be great, right? I got some mixed feedback. But like, now real quick, I mean, we've been talking about this. How do you continue to feel about Amen Thompson off the ball? I feel like it's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Like, off the ball, he wreaks havoc off the ball. On the ball, I feel like that limits the effectiveness. Like, as a screener, he's so strong and athletic that he's potent. As a secondary, tertiary, like, playmaker passer, that's where he really does his damage. When, not when he's the focal point, but when he's just another guy and now he's creating. And then also, man, like, before the season, we talked about Fred and Amen could fit because Fred could play off ball and Amen could play on the ball, but now it's Jalen playing on the ball. And Fred is playing off the ball. But man, Fred VanVleet, I was like, yo, is he already like the 5th best Rockets point guard ever? Right? Like Calvin Murphy, Chris Paul. Okay. I'm not going in order here, just listening to him. Calvin Murphy, Chris Paul, Steve Francis, Kenny Smith. Who else? Sam Cassell. But like Sam Cassell wasn't starting in this type of role with this type of load.
Some of the old heads gonna get with you on that one, but
yeah. Well, look, I love. Look, don't get me wrong. I love Sam Cassell and what he did to win championships. Obviously, reigns supreme. But I'm just saying, like, there's a conversation to be had. You know, like Fred VanVleet, this franchise, point guard wise, up until we got Chris Paul. And by the way, James Harden's a shooting guard to me.
Yeah.
And if you look at his listing on Basketball Reference, I think there's only one season where he was listed as point guard, and that was, I think, D'Antoni's first season. So he's a shooting guard. But this franchise has not been a point guard rich franchise, at least in the 2000s, right? It was Francis, and then it was Rayford, what?
It was
David Wesley, John Barry, Bob Sura, Rayford Alston,
Moochie
Aaron
Norris.
Brooks. You know, Aaron Brooks had a hell of one season where he dropped like 19. Kyle Lowry, but he was still younger. Kyle Lowry. You know, Pat Bev, but like I think VanVleet's a better player than Pat Bev. You know what I mean? So interesting thought. But all that to say, Jalen on the ball is starting to do all the things that we've been wanting him to do that I didn't know I thought he could do, and then I got to the point where I was like, man, I guess it's just not there. He just seems like a when I get the ball, I'm shooting kind of guy, and that's not what's happening. But what's interesting is, man, the level of difficulty of shots that he's hitting. I know I see some people always talking about like, because kind of to your point, right? Jalen on the ball. Trust me, I get a lot of tweets about the Rip Hamilton comment that.
That's like a new joke.
Yeah, it's like the new meme, right? I will point out the very first bucket he made against, I think, the Bulls, ran off the baseline, caught, whipped it 3. So that athleticism.
Wizards too. I broke down that game. They ran a off-ball screen for Amen Thompson for him and Amen, and he got a corner 3 off the rip off that play. To me, that was.
I think it was that game, not the Bulls game. Sorry. Yeah. So, but yeah, on the ball. Look, man. If he's doing this on the ball, we have a whole new dimension unlocked for this team, right? Because that was not there previously. We saw flashes of it, but like it wasn't a reliable thing. If he's doing this on the ball, it's over. I mean, we have 2 young stars that can create for themselves, that can score 20, 30, 40 whenever they want, and then can open it up for other guys. And then now the shooters matter. Fred VanVleet, Jabari, if Dylan's hitting. So yeah, there's just so many points of attack. And by the way, Tari Easton's not playing. Kent Whitmore's not playing. Yeah. Like we're doing this with shout out to Jeff Green. Jeff Green has come alive lately.
He's
back. Right? This is what happens when Jeff Green's making threes. Jock Landale playing out of his mind. It's just amazing to me how many guys who looked like at one point were not playable are now beyond playable. And you got to give them credit individually. But for me, I think Ime Udoka, this is a wizard at work that you're seeing. This is a guy who knows how to get buy-in and a guy who knows how to elevate. Because for a while, my thought was, all right, well, we have good talent, but do we have elite NBA talent? And we hadn't seen them get to that level yet collectively. Now I'm thinking, yeah, we do have pretty damn good, potentially elite NBA talent, but you're seeing the difference between a coach that, you know, kind of got them going and a coach that has extracted their greatness and is putting it front and center on display. And that's kind of the biggest contrast that I've seen.
And before we get to the Ime thing, LeBron and JJ Redick have their podcast. What is it? Mind of the Game or whatever it's called. Mind the Game. One of the discussions, and I think this ties in, and we're going to talk about Jalen Green here, that came up with them was LeBron was really talking about a lot of the players and JJ as well aren't being
potential.
The potential versus what guys do, and they tie that into development and basketball processing and kind of how guys are taught as they're coming out of their whether it's high school, AAU, etc. When I think about Jalen Green, and when they were talking, he really did come to mind for me, and not in a negative way, but you think about his journey to the NBA. He is literally one of the poster children for the AAU type of player, right? number one in his class, basically like a transcendent high school player, goes to the G League Ignite, who's literally being shut down
Yes.
for failing to develop the players that they were supposed to. And that's where he's coming out of. And then you go straight from that to Steven Silas. No shot at Silas, but obviously he was in over his head trying to develop a team with guys like KPJ, Christian Wood. You had all these characters that come in and out. No real, we see the contrast with Coach Udoka as far as when it comes to me, what's the most important thing with young players and building them up is accountability and structure. A lot of this stuff to me with Jalen is that the talent has always been there. But when you don't have the proper development, the game really suffers. And I think what he is, honestly, he's been a victim. And, you could say it's his fault for not training more or maybe his coaches. But to me, he's a victim of a system that doesn't emphasize teaching the game. And what it looks like to me is that over this year, as he is under new coaching, you think about what Udoka said after one of the Clippers losses, where he said him and Jalen sat on the plane and watched film on shots he could have taken. I'm hearing a lot of Jalen's post-game interviews on watch film. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. He's becoming somebody that is learning how to play basketball, because one of the most impressive things offensively for me, obviously, like right now he's averaging 27 in the 11 games we're referencing for this pod, 27.8 points, 51% field goal, 41% from three, 5.7 rebounds, 3.5 assists, a team high plus 14 per game. Like he's averaging a plus 14 in that stretch. So he is a winner and he's playing good defense. What I'm seeing from that version is somebody that's starting to learn the game of basketball, because a lot of the stuff I saw before, he was playing off of instincts and kind of just out there running around. And I think what people don't value about the players with really high IQ. Now, I don't know what Jalen's IQ potential is, but when it comes to the question about, and I'm going to ask you this question, what I see about players, me personally, I think IQ is innate. I think IQ is like you're born with it. LeBron thinks that too. JJ thinks you can learn to a certain point, and I agree with that. I think you can teach somebody the game, and there's a balance between IQ and talent. And I think you could take a talented person and give them enough like development and training, and that they'll get to a happy medium, and they could be like a championship level player. But I agree. Like to me, my view is that I want as many high IQ players on our team as much as possible. That's why you value men, Thompson, Senguns of the world, because to me, when you have a healthy mix of talent and IQ, that's what you can really do anything. That's why I threw out that D word last time. For Jalen, to me, personally, obviously, there's a few guys in the league that are savants. I think Luka's, the Hardens, the LeBrons. I don't think he's a savant, but I think he has a skill set that he is a genius at, which is scoring. And for him, the development that I'm going to see for him going forward is for him to keep learning the game, because everything else will come in after that. But it was just interesting to me, like to watch what we're seeing right now. And even though it looks like an anomaly, to me, what it looks like is a guy that's learning basketball. And I'm just curious what your view on all that is.
I mean, I think it's layered. It's a really it's a complex discussion, right? So on one hand, IQ. So I think IQ is innate, but I think there's levels to the IQ. So I agree with JJ. You can learn. You can become better. I think I would equate it to the difference between, like, if we're talking academics, the difference between someone who's just a brainiac genius and then someone who, isn't stupid, but they're not a brainiac or genius. They have the ability, maybe like a B- level student. And then with maturity, they become a B+, A- type student, right? Instead of like top 1% of their class, right? The LeBrons, the Hardens, the Lukas, they're like the 1%ers. Sengun isn't a 1%er, but he's closer to it than not being closer to it, right? If you could imagine Sengun's IQ with Jalen's skill and athleticism, that is like a 1% player, right?
Amen, Thompson. But yeah, keep going.
Well,
yet
almost.
to be seen. We'll see.
Yeah. If a man could shoot, then absolutely. Yeah. A man's IQ, though, so that is part of what it allows him to be this effective, right? Like I think we talked about it. I can't remember if I said it on here or before we got on. he hadn't set screens. He says he hasn't been a screener until he got to the NBA. Now, screening should be just like it's obvious, right? You screen, you roll, but the feel he has and the effectiveness he has as a screener and how quickly he's picked it up, like that just shows you how smart that kid is. But so there's IQ and then there's maturity. I think what we're seeing from Jalen is maturity, right? He's starting to figure out the feels. And I want to be clear, right? Udoka said this in a post game, I think after beating Utah last night. He said that Jalen is learning like what shots not to take. It's not just his shooting. I would like to get more from him on that answer, because to me, I'm still seeing him take like crazy shots, but they're going in, which is badass. Don't get me wrong. But he's taking like contested step backs. These are the same shots that, they just weren't going in. And instead of being 5 for 7 for 11 points to start the game, he would be like 2 for 7, for 4 points to start the game. But now they're going in. So I don't know if he's like cutting out bad shots. I think he's just become a super shot maker. But elite IQ versus maturity. And then there's other portions of that discussion, right? Like being surrounded by Christian Wood, Kevin Porter Jr., Josh Christopher. I don't think Josh Christopher is a bad dude. I don't know him at all. I'm just saying that being in a situation where you're surrounded by younger, just when you're younger, you're more immature. That just is what it is, right? That's not anyone's fault. We were all younger. And when we were younger, we were just less mature. That's just what it is. But you're surrounded by younger, less mature guys. And that team that he grew up on with the Rockets had like 7 or 8, 21-year-olds or younger, right? So it's just impossible, which is the value of vets, of course. But you put that, and then you add that with the coach like Silas, who probably a great guy, probably knows the game very well. But did he have the ability to get his hand around a situation and say, hey, this is what it is. You're going to listen to me, and this is how we're going to do it, period. To get his message to resonate, right? Like, this is a simple way to break it down. But if my coach is like got his head on his 20-year-old star's chest, like laughing and stuff, you know what I mean? There's just like a paternalistic kind of like lack there. We have not seen any type of photo like that from Ime, right? Ime is always just strong, firm, directing traffic, not like getting on their level in this kind of, big bro, little bro, right, type way. He's very much like the father figure, or so it seems from the outside.
He's never told a player he loves them in the open conference?
Has he cried because someone got an extension, right? And I know we're ragging on Silas. Maybe it's unfair.
Cheap shot, sorry.
Yeah, maybe it's unfair to Silas, but I mean, Frank, you played college ball, bro. Like, you tell me, what was your coach like when you played college ball?
He was a hard ass. But in retrospect, that's really what you love. Some of my best coaches, they have a balance of demanding a lot from you. At the same time, they actually care about your well-being. And you can't just be a rah, 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 like I'm going to run you into the ground. At the same time, you can't, because I remember when I was younger, like in high school, we had one of our young coaches was cool. We used to take advantage of him. We'd be chilling during practice, playing around. But when I got, as I developed and got older, when you get to those coaches that are about that business, they demand excellence, and you almost don't want to let them down. And I think to your point, what Udoka has done, and there was after the game yesterday, they asked him about whether he's ever seen anything like this with Jalen. And in the most Udoka answer, his response was that Jalen he was playing good. Now he's on a good streak. The shots are going in. But yeah, I've seen a lot of guys like this. He said he's up there with them. And to me, that is just him to a T, because people accused him of hating Alperen Sengun. After one of his many good games, Udoka would be like, yeah, he's playing great. But the team was great today as well. Guys were hitting shots. And some of the fans were like, oh, he hates Sengun. He does the same thing. This is him. He is a guy out of the Popovich tree. Once again, if you guys understand the history in San Antonio, Greg Popovich made it his point to, almost to a fault, use Tim Duncan as an example of discipline and accountability to the other players. Because if you're going to hold your best player to the highest standard, everybody else is going to fall in line. And I think that mentality, you can see it how it permeates throughout the season. And tying this back into Jalen's development, I think that this, like what we're seeing, where Udoka used the words, he has to break a lot of things, bad habits, break it down and rebuild. I think we're seeing that player rebuilt, because your question about the shot, I think what he's talking about, and he's alluded to this early in the season, it's not really about like Jalen still takes bad shots and they're going in. Some of those shots are bad, like the double step back threes. Like But when you're feeling it, whatever. But the shot, to me, it's the reading the defense. Like when a guy goes under, shoot it.
Yep.
If you have a
Yep.
mismatch, attack it. I think that's what he wasn't doing early on in the season. And I think the right shot is whatever the leverage that you have against the defense, use it, make or miss, and live with it. And I think he's doing that way more now than he was doing before, where he was either deferring or just doing the opposite of what you were supposed to do. Like, you got to slow big. Why are you snaking it to take a contested two when you can beat him to the spot at the rim? There's a guy going under on you. Pull up. Like, don't reset for an ISO. Like, so those type of things, I think that's what he's doing a lot better. That's what I've seen anyways.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to make this comparison because I've been thinking about it. It's like watching a Pokemon evolve, like skip the middle evolution.
Charmeleon straight to Charizard, bro. Like Charmander to Charizard.
Right? I mean, right though? Like, we haven't seen, like, everyone says, oh, progression is not linear, which is correct. That is correct. His, like, there was no gradual, there were flashes, but just the numbers themselves were pretty similar. And some of them regressed, and then all of a sudden it was like, nope, boom, like it's kind of like at the end of the Matrix when Neo like looks down and he's like, oh shit, I am that guy, and he just all of a sudden realizes it and all the craziness starts happening. But yeah, I mean, I just think there's a level of maturity and he, more than anyone, and I said this, and I got some interesting pushback from it or criticism or whatever, but you said this earlier. I said I forgot to factor in, or sometimes I forget to factor in how poor his development structure around him was, right? G League, Steven Silas for 2 years, factored in with all those young guys, immature players that, like Christian Wood, who was a journeyman for a reason.
Right.
KPJ obviously has evidenced his immaturity, right? Like, that's just not good to have around a player. So he really, I have, and people say, how could you forget to factor that in? And for me, the reason was, the underlying reason, one of the reasons, the main reason, was that he could not shoot. And shooting is coach proof. Right. To me, right? Obviously, you can get a shooting coach to help you learn how to shoot, and that's not what I'm talking about. Because if you've ever played, shooting coach is going to help you shoot when you're staying still off the catch, right? Shooting coach cannot help you, or can only marginally help you off the dribble, right? That the fluidity and how fast the action is, and the quick reaction time you have to gather and adjust over where the defender is, like that is rhythm, and that's innate. So all the other stuff aside, he just couldn't shoot. Even when he was wide open, he just couldn't shoot. And for me, that's where I was like, man, that is a big problem. And so that's why I was like, look, you can talk about the Silas stuff, you can talk about the G League, but like the shot, he should be able to shoot at least decently, right? Not like this historically bad level. And so that was kind of, from me, that was my perspective, but I guess it's just all starting to come together. And look, if he's got the step back, because his first step is so quick that when he crosses it back, you have to respect it if that shot's falling. And if that step back is falling, all of a sudden he becomes extremely difficult to guard, because now you have to pay attention to the step back. Now you have to bite. And he's so fast that if you bite, if first of all, if he's making it, and you're screwed. But if you bite on that step up, now you can't guard him because he's going to go by you. And now he's starting to finish. It's just insane. But yeah, what Ime Udoka has done, kind of to your point, like, you can be the bully like a Bill O'Brien, but that shit runs out. Once people stop being scared of you, that shit runs out and it's no longer effective. You have to have that balance, and you have to have that long-term play of, hey, psychologically, I need to keep you guys motivated, and kind of what you said, motivated to not let me down, right? At this level of sports, it's all about focus. It's not all about focus, but focus is a big part of it. It's like when you're driving, the slightest loss in focus and you crash, and maybe it's like a huge catastrophic crash, right? Same thing in sports. You lose a little bit of focus, you'll come out and get your ass beat by 20 or 30, right? But maintaining that focus through the ups, through the downs, and then taking that focus and transforming that into confidence and rhythm, it's like this all weirdly connected thing. That's when you get what you're seeing right now. And not just from Jalen Green, but from the team. Jeff Green, he's shooting threes again, like he's in a rhythm. They've gotten to a point, I was talking about this on Rockets Watch last night, they've gotten to a point where they've stopped thinking, right?
Yep.
They're not thinking, they're just playing. And it makes me wonder, for Jalen specifically, that child news, the pregnancy news, it's hard to think that wasn't weighing on him in some way. Because like once that became public knowledge, and it's something that I guess he didn't have to suppress, and I don't know, I have no idea, but I'm just guessing. he's just playing free, and all the talent is just like molded together. So it's, as a fan of basketball, it's one of the wildest things I've ever witnessed. I'm just watching these games like laughing because I'm just like, yo, this I don't even know how to make sense of this. It's insane.
To me, there's no going back for Jalen as far as not the efficiency. I think Coach Udoka alluded to it that he's in a rhythm shooting right now, and once you see it going, he's going to be a streaky shooter. I think most of his career, but I'm seeing scalable things. I think the finishing has been good for some time at the rim. I think the defense has been good for some time. I think those are kind of some of the trailing signs of change that were coming prior to even what we're seeing when it's showing up on the court. But for him, I personally believe that he will never go back to that player we saw in December and January, just because I think something did click. And for me, it's as athletic as he is, it's always been about focus, as you alluded to. There's no reason Jalen shouldn't be a good defender, except lack of focus and understanding of the game. His decision making, obviously, as JJ alluded in the pod, you can teach guys, even if you have to tell them where to be and draw it up for them to see it. You can teach guys like how to do their jobs, and I think that that's something that he's learning. At least he has a baseline for it. I think that what makes him so intriguing as a prospect, the question is, what have I ever seen this? He's one of the few athletes, and this is where when we first drafted him, I made the comps to Kobe, and I used to go crazy. You know, I go crazy with our comps for our young guys, but what they've taught me over the years is cool out. But anyways,
yeah. Who were you telling?
I know, right? But one thing, he is probably one of the first players in the NBA of his archetype. And what I mean by that is that he has the explosion of Derrick Rose and Russell Westbrook with the potential shot making of like not like Steph, but like that. I'm coming off the screen and you better guard me if I'm on.
Yep.
You think of all Devin Booker, Murray, none of them have that combination of top 1% athleticism that could potentially be a good shooter and a driver.
Zach LaVine
is not, he can shoot. He can drive in some ways, but he's very stiff. His is like one. I'm talking about the handles of like coming off that screen where I can mix you. I can get you on a step back. Zach LaVine is like, he's almost a stiff player. Like, I'm going to attack.
He's athletic as hell, though.
Yeah, he's cold, efficient. Like he's cold, but he's not as fluid as what we're seeing from Jalen right now. Jalen is doing it really, really fluid.
Jalen hit an in and out cross.
Yeah.
And then
Zach ain't doing that. Zach gonna get to you. He gonna footwork you. He gonna get off the glass. He gonna stop and pop. He might, change direction on you. But when I say like Rose and Russ, I'm talking about change of direction within the drive, where I'm going really hard downhill, stop, then go back again. Zach ain't doing all that stuff. Like that's damn near on some John Morant type stuff. All of this does lead to the question of, and I wouldn't end this pod without us having something that people are going to be mad about, our opinions. When it comes to these extension talks, I know you already know it. I know you were like, damn, I almost made it out of here without. We got to give them something to be mad at. When it comes to the extension talks, let me frame it in a way that gives you wiggle room. What would make you say that, you know what, maybe we do need to take care of Jalen this summer and just get it out the way?
What would make me say that? The way he's playing right now. I mean, right. that's the cop out, but that's the easy answer. If this is the guy that he is, yeah, you want to keep him on this team. I think there's no question about that, right? What sucks is that, and before we do get out of here, let's make sure, I don't think we dove deep enough into Ime and the Celtics comp.
For sure.
So, but what sucks is that Sengun went down. So now we have these questions, right? I hate the questions. And then what I hate more than having questions is having to wait 6 months, 5 months to get an answer to that question. Yep. And then even once you wait 6 months until October, well, we got to wait till December to let them get rolling. So we're not going to know this. We're not going to really know what's what for what we're in April. We're not going to know for at least 8 months what's what. And that's a long time, right? Even if Sengun comes back, like, ankle injury, we're seeing Jock Landale. Yeah. We're seeing Ime Thompson, by the way. Took him a minute to come back. So ankle injuries, like even if Sengun comes back, like what do I make of that, right? It's tough because they were starting to find it naturally from a basketball perspective, the same way that people say like, oh, Jalen's so talented, he's got to figure it out, and now he is. Sengun and Jalen are both so talented, and their games fit in theory. Their games fit. You got a guy that can do everything down low, who can also pass and hit cutters. You got a guy who now is an elite perimeter scorer. We know what pistol action is. We know what happens with DHOs. We know what happens when you get Jalen downhill with the passer. They should fit, right? Jokic, Murray, Sabonis, Fox. Like, this is not a new thing. Pau Gasol and Kobe is one of those. Pau Gasol is an example, is a comp for Sengun that I really love. He's a little bit shorter and not as long, but so they started to put it together, right? And now we get deprived of seeing them both do it at the same time. It's almost like T-Mac and Yao, because right as one is going off, right, the other one got hurt, and when one was going off earlier, the other one just was struggling. So what do you do? I don't know. I really don't know. I'd like to think in an ideal world, there is no reason that you don't keep these guys together. I don't know why you wouldn't, unless, I don't know, there's some type of, like, we saw the Pacers trade Sabonis, right? The Pacers never had, I want to point out, those Pacers never had an elite perimeter player. The best perimeter player those Pacers had was Victor Oladipo, who was this version of Jalen blows Victor Oladipo out of the water to me. So I just don't know what the vision for team building is. And I've been critical of, I've given some heat to Rafael Stone. However, what they're building right now and the way these players are coming together, it's almost like we're 8 deep with who we drafted and then the free agents we signed, right? Between the core 6 and then Fred and Dylan, and now Steven Adams and Jock and Jeff Green, like, that's 10 right there. Jayshawn Tate, 11, So it's like, what do you do with this team? What is the ceiling of this team? And we're not going to know because they've been so inconsistent. So that's the tough thing for me. I just don't know. But yeah, I think every team's ideal when they rebuild is to draft 2 players that fit, that have star potential. And I think the Rockets have done that on a surface level. But what do you think?
To me, it's an easy answer. Yeah, you keep them together. You have 2 complementary positions, 2 complementary players. A lot of Jalen Green's best games in his career are playing next to Alperen Sengun. In fact, if you go look at his highest scoring games, it's when Sengun is him and they're cooking in 2-man. So I've seen it. Honestly, to me, the conundrum for the Rockets is we've seen Fred and Alp. What we got this year was Alperen's greatness with a very limited 2-man game, meaning Fred is not getting to the cup. So teams play them a certain way. I don't see why it shouldn't be better with a guy that can get to the basket on a breeze. So I think they'll open up each other's game. I've seen teams start trapping Jalen a little bit. They do it in stretches. I'm curious to see what smart coaches like Miami's Spoelstra is going to do to try to stop him. But I don't understand the point of, I have a great player, so that means that the player that would literally make his life easier, they can't. Like, to me, those are they're each other's outlet valves. If Jalen is cooking like this, teams are going to trap him. And when teams trap him, give the ball to the other guy that can cook. And then now you have to solve a very hard problem. And I think Udoka is a smart enough basketball mind to understand that and know that this is how we're going to win, right? Because regardless of how they're playing now, it's not going to be, to me, this where they look right now is not how you build a team. They're very unbalanced as a team right now. This will not win a playoff series, in my opinion, or a championship. You need not only just Sengun, you need other complementary pieces. We still need, to me, another rim running kind of rim protector big on the roster. You need more shooting on the roster. I don't want to rely on Jeff Green in the playoff series. So I think I'm looking at it from, once again, back to that dynasty. How do you build a dynasty? You get a lot of smart guys, a lot of talented guys on the same team, and then you plug in the holes where they have collective deficiencies and you move forward. So if
you also get a little bit of financial luck.
Yes, and you get lucky with a guy getting hurt. You know what I mean? A guy getting hurt, key players getting hurt, some guy underperforms for a stretch. So you know what I mean? And then what you do is you have a smart coach, which we have with Ime, and you kind of build stack by stack, step by step.
Just to be clear, when you say guys get hurt, I think what you mean, before the comments go crazy on you, I think what you mean is you get someone for a cheaper price because they got hurt.
Yes.
Is that what you mean?
Oh yeah. Let me clarify. Sometimes, like Steph Curry is the golden boy for that storyline. Sometimes things like this happen, and it's, if we're looking at it, I know we love these players, but at the end of the day, if you look at it from the perspective of the Rockets, some good things that can happen with when players get down. Not that we want anybody injured, but it does give you some leverage. With Sengun, to me, the body of work is already there. He's going to get paid, whether here or he's worth whatever they're going to off, like the what they call the fun max. Jalen is working his way into that conversation. I think he would have got it probably at some point because I thought next year he would have had a good year. But the way he's playing now, as far as getting into early prior in this summer, to me, if they keep this up and they actually do make the play in, I think it's like you have to give him that money because he has shown you what you wanted to see. Like, can I trust this guy to help carry my team? Those are the type of players that you give the money to. Sengun carried the team for the first about 60% of the season, 65%. He goes down. Jalen Green carried it for the rest. So if I'm a front office, I'm seeing like I got two guys that can carry this roster. I'm looking around the roster. Jabari Smith Jr., I don't think he's going to be a max player. I don't think Tari's going to be a max player. Honestly, I don't think Cam Whitmer is going to be a max player. Amen Thompson, I think he's going to be all defensive guy. And I think that's your third max. So
that's your Draymond money.
That's your money. Yeah, that's your money you're going to give to him. The Sengun thing, I don't know if this is right, but if he goes and makes All NBA next year, he's eligible for the designated max, right? Or
I don't know.
Or the rules different?
I don't know the answer to that question.
I think it is. If y'all in the comments know, let me know. There is some incentive for them to get it out the way because I feel like if we are on this pace of winning, if he puts up, and before we even dive into Coach Udoka, I'm going to tell you the stats for the team post in this 11 game stretch. This is everybody, and this could give you a vision of what this team could look like at their peak. Jalen Green in this 11 game stretch since the Phoenix games, averaging 27 points per game, 5 rebounds, 3 assists. Alperen Sengun in the stretch he played with 5 games during 11 games, he was averaging 24 points per game, 12 rebounds, 5 assists. Fred VanVleet averaging 19 points per game, shooting 47% from 3, which is crazy. Jabari is giving you 12 and 6.
How many dimes for Fred?
Fred is averaging, and my bad, for 10. 19 and 10. Not saying, okay, even if you take off some of this, let's say this is the peak of like, this is what they look like. To me, like, I mean, this is it, man. I think I've seen, I want to like, this is it. This is a good team.
Let me say, I was going through some of my old tweets and I saw that, I want to say it was November 14th that I said this. Maybe not. If someone wants to go through my Twitter, go for it. The Rockets were, I don't know what their record was. I don't remember. They were winning though. And they were number 1 in defense in the whole league. Right. And their net rating was like +5 as a team. And I forget what their record was, but it was like, I want to say, I don't know, 15 or so games through the season. So it's interesting to me how quickly we forget these things, right? 10, 15 games through the season, number 1 in defense, we're buzzing. Then they go down, and then now they're doing it again, right? So like they've done this in bits and pieces. They've done it in different ways, which is the most impressive thing to me, right? There isn't just this one way they've relied on. They've done it riding Sengun. They've done it, riding Jalen Green. They've done it without Sengun even playing, not just riding Jalen Green, but without Sengun even playing. They've weathered the storm with injuries to Tari and Jabari and Dylan Brooks, who are like their nucleus of winged perimeter defenders. So they're just versatile. But it's not like this is the only time this season we've seen it. They've done it in different ways. And so it's up to Udoka to figure out, and the front office to push the right buttons. But I think it's a good problem to have. So this is like the most positive I've felt about this team this decade. But they are now, it's almost at that point where the fun is almost not over, but like the honeymoon fun type, like the Texans had their season. Now the judgment happens, right? If the Texans go out next season and they perform the exact same way they did this season, they will get criticized for that. You know what I mean? Because now it's not good enough. So now they've hit that level. And I just don't know what you do. And I'm not saying it's that you can't do it. I'm just saying I don't know what you do to take this to the next level. I don't know what the answer is. I really don't.
I mean, internal development, I think, is going to happen this summer. Summer is, for the young guys, biggest leap. The starting 5 for the Rockets for up until January, they were a top 5 net rated in the NBA. I'm talking about for 2.5 months.
And that's before Jalen broke
with
out.
Jalen Green being a negative in that starting 5. They were, if you look points per possession, and both on offense and defense, not separate the team and all the CTE players we have off the bench. We're talking about that starting five with Jabari, young Sengun, young Jalen, with Dylan Brooks and Fred VanVleet was right between, I think, the Celtics and the Nuggets or something like that. They were like number 3 or 4. It was OKC, it was Celtics, Nuggets, I think us, OKC, and I forgot who the other team was, and Clippers with Harden when he kind of started rolling over there. So it's a real team, man. And this does open up for the Coach Udoka thing. With Coach Udoka and the Celtics and how they looked last year, I mean, with Coach Udoka and the Celtics and how they looked in the season that he was coaching over there, they started off pretty rough to begin the season and kind of hit a stretch. Is there anything that you're seeing similar between that Celtics team and this Rockets team?
So they started 25. I'm going off my memory here, but I think this is correct. 25-25 through the first 50. And that was a team with expectations and like all-star players already. And then they finished the season 26-6. So that's 32 games plus 50. That's 82, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I think the math is right on that. And they finished 51-31, I believe. So on paper, they took off. It was like late January. Now, what coincided with that was that they traded for Derek White, and they needed a point guard. And Derek White wasn't like pure point guard, but he's a capable point guard. But he gave them that extra versatility that they needed, both in terms of being a guy who could handle, a guy who could shoot, a guy who could defend, and a guy who did enough creating and distributing to perfectly fit. Because before his arrival, they put a lot of that pressure on Marcus Smart. And Marcus Smart is not that guy, right? To do those types of things. Marcus Smart needs to kind of just play his role. Marcus Smart to me is like a free safety that isn't great at coverage, but he will, knock you out at the line of scrimmage, right? And they needed like an actual coverage safety as well to kind of complement that. And they got that. The Rockets didn't do that. The Rockets didn't make any move. I mean, they got Steven Adams, but he's not playing, right? So that's the difference to me, is it's like that Celtics team got a piece that allowed everything else to shake loose and begin flourishing. This Rockets team just figured it out. Now, you could argue that maybe Sengun going down did that, but I think that we'd both agree that they started playing like this before Sengun went down, right? And they were turning that corner kind of as a team, and then obviously everyone has stepped it up in his absence. So it's really interesting because in Udoka's he's not even done with his second season, but this man has, we'll just say, 2 seasons of NBA coaching as a head coach under his belt. And in both seasons, we're seeing his teams struggle relative to the expectations. I guess the Rockets were at expectation, and then they started falling below once they started losing those games. But the Celtics were definitely below expectations, and then hit this point where everything seems to click and they take off. Now, what we don't know about him is how do his teams respond in the following years, because he hasn't had that opportunity. And that kind of goes back to the comp with the Texans, right? Everything's peachy right now. If they're 9-8, 10-7 next season, people won't be happy. If they're a wild card team next season, people are going to be like, damn, there's going to be below expectations. Because the talk around the Texans right now is Super Bowl sleeper, which is crazy. That's a different discussion, but it's crazy. So the talk around these Rockets, let's say they make the play-in. It's not going to be, yeah, let's go make another play-in. It's going to be, wow, this is the next young core. And they're on the OKC trajectory. And if you look at those numbers in terms of their win percentage, these Rockets, they are on the OKC trajectory. These Rockets are right now getting to where OKC was last year. And so people obviously expect more and more. So we don't know that about Udoka, right? We know his first punch seems to be very potent. We don't know what the rest has in store. I believe in him. I have no doubts about him. But I'm just saying we don't know it. Now, in terms of a parallel, I don't even know. I mean, they're defending. He seems to get guys to buy in. It's kind of the thing where he's like stubborn about his message. He seems stubborn in a good way. Stubborn about his message, like, no, trust me, this is what it's going to be. I'm not going to make any knee-jerk reactions. Credit to him for not benching Jalen Green. A lot of people, like me, thought Jalen Green should be benched. He was right. People like me were wrong. But he seems very like stubborn and sticking to his guns, and then it just works. And man, he seems to understand that once it works, it really, really works. It's not like it just kind of works. So yeah, I mean, the Rockets are 10-1 in their last 11. Yeah. Those Celtics were 26-6 in their last 6. We got 13 games left. The Rockets are now in a position that in order to win 40 games, they got to finish 5-7, which I would be shocked if they don't do. So that's kind of how I see it, man. I don't know what you think.
I think to me, logically, you would continuity in structure should yield better results. I think the consistency from year to year. I'm curious to see what the Celtics would have looked like with him in year two. I think they would have won a championship by now, in my opinion, because as much as
especially if you gave him
yeah,
Porzingis.
yeah, especially I think the impact he has on motivating men is probably the biggest attribute that a head coach. X and O's, I think assistants are more X and O's guys, and I'm okay with that. When I played football, our head coach, he didn't really talk X and O's that much. Like he was really the guy that a head coach on a sports team is more like the team's manager. And they're the one that make big decisions, but a lot of the task of the day to day is delegated to the assistant coaches and personnel downstream. But they're like the CEO of the team structure. And as you know, Roosh, you work in corporate America. I work in corporate. Having a transformational leader is the number one thing that people look for. A person that galvanizes people, motivates them, brings the best, and takes them to that next level. And I think when you have one of those type of leaders in your organization, it really does impact everybody. And if you can you think about Jabari, how bad he was last year, to being a pretty good player as a starter. You think about Jalen, inconsistency, still inconsistent this year, but what he's turned into as a defender, as a rebounder, as a guy that's playing winning basketball now. Think about Sengun, a dude who was a ancillary secondary player under Steven Silas, to drawing out this player that a lot of us saw early on in his career to being what it is. Fred having one of his more efficient seasons. Dylan Brooks.
Fred's having a career year. He's unlocked. That not talked about enough. He's unlocked Fred VanVleet.
Like Fred is just perfect. And then Dylan Brooks, quiet as kept. I was scared about not just his, he's going to do what he does, but I thought he's going to be a ball hog.
Me too.
And this dude, there are games he'll take 5 shots and still play clamp defense in the last minute of the fourth quarter with no hesitation. Dylan Brooks was benched by Coach Udoka in the game. And you didn't hear not one peep about it, a disgruntled. So I look at all that, and I think that scales up. To me, the next step, I don't know if you saw during the game, John Collins was dapping him up and like saying something to him. And they were laughing back and forth at each other.
To Udoka?
Yeah, to Udoka. Like in the middle of the game, just it was like coming out of half. They were like laughing. He dapped him up, gave him a hug. The next step is you scale that up. Let's get in some better players, and then draw out of them.
So I would have agreed with you on the better players like 5 days ago, but now I'm like, I don't know. Like, are these guys really?
Jeff Green, Londale, all of that is nice. Give me better players.
Sure.
I want to see.
I agree with that.
I don't know. I'm just going to throw out a name.
Steven Adams would be a good.
Steven. Let me see what Steven Adams on lock looks like. I want to see what real NBA talent that's not like, damn, can Jock do this for? I love Jock. And whether he plays good or not, to me, the Rockets view him as a piece of money because they've bloated his contract to be used. He's structured for a trade. So when he plays good is gravy for us, but I don't think Stone is going to be like, damn, I don't know if I
got to keep.
Yeah, I want to get this shooter from this team, but man, Jock is making it real. Nah, bro.
Go
ahead.
Sorry. What's interesting is that their philosophy throughout this time has been, hey, let's accumulate talent. Let's see what happens with the talent. And then let's structure the cap and let's structure these contracts in a manner that gives us the ability to go swing for the fences, right? Prior to this season, if you would have asked the Rockets, they'd have probably told you, yeah, we'd love a player like a Zion Williamson or a Joel Embiid, right? And you need contracts that have the salary that also are attractive enough to another team, like a Jock Landale, who has a bunch of team options that you can just decline and treat it as expiring salary, right? To go get those types of players. Now, I wonder what their approach would be. I feel like that has to have changed. I feel like the swing for the fences, let me throw in a couple of these young talents, like a Cam Whitmore or whoever else, Jabari Smith or whatever. I feel like that might have changed a little bit because maybe, unless this is not real, maybe you have these star players already here and you don't need to go swing for the fences. And now you just go get, they're in a position, to me, it reminds me of Phoenix in the bubble, right? Devin Booker, Ayton, Bridges, they started balling and they started winning. And what they did that summer was they went and got Chris Paul and then they went to the finals, right? They didn't go get Giannis or something. They got like this veteran who obviously Chris Paul was a very, very good player,
right.
But they got that last piece to really give them the juice. Who's that equivalent for this team? I don't know. But to your point about Udoka, what I see and to your point about managing like egos, you know, the Bulls, the architect of the triangle offense was a guy named Tex Winters, who was an assistant coach. It wasn't Phil Jackson.
Right.
It was Tex Winters. Phil Jackson, and I read his book. I think he has 2. I think I read the second one, 11 Rings or whatever. All he talks about is managing egos, right? And making that manifest into something else. So with those Bulls, like and Phil Jackson was real on like some hippie type shit, which, you know, he'd have like meditating sessions and like just all these little things to keep the egos balanced. It wasn't about X's and O's. It was about getting guys to buy in. It was about selflessness. And you think about your own individual career, and anyone who's listening to this, think about that as well. Confidence and doing it for someone other than yourself are 2 things that you can't quantify. You can't really track analytically, but you know it unlocks this whole different dimension. And why is that important? Because if you've ever worked for a boss that makes you want to do it for them, to not let them down, to not make them look bad, that brings out a different type of worker in you. And when you have the confidence to do it at the same time, that's usually when you're doing some of your best work. So how is that relevant? If Udoka has these guys not wanting to let him down, right? Like you said, you tweeted something like you let your mother-in-law down on the bracket.
My bracket is screwed. Off rip.
And I heard the saxophone from Let Nas Down. That's what I keep hearing, right? But it's like, could you imagine? And I'm just guessing here, but you got to imagine that letting Steven Silas down feels different than letting Udoka down in this season.
That's facts.
Right?
That's facts.
And we can't prove that, but you just have to think.
And to you know, people know my views on as far as trade. I never wanted a big star. When I meant trades, I mean ancillary players. So you're going to upgrade Londale with like a I don't know, just a center that's could start, but maybe it's a backup. Because I think as they move forward, those are the type of players you need. You upgraded Aaron Holiday for another.
Don't you do it?
You said what?
Don't you do it? Don't trade Aaron Holiday. That's my guy.
Okay, I forgot your holiday season crew.
I'm kidding.
But maybe he's not true. Whatever. But my point is that like they still need better players to compete with the elite teams. And I feel like we can be an elite team. But I love how you close that out. So we can end it there. Do want to let the viewers and listeners know, if you guys, we do have these podcasts on all streaming platforms, on Spotify, Apple. So check it out. It's Rockets Talk on there. And as always, if you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button. If you like this video, hit the like button. Keep rocking with the Chop Shop. I'm going to keep dropping that fire.